Please turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 29. We will be finishing our study in the book of 1 Samuel tonight. We have, it seems like we've really come a long way in the growth of the nation from the birth of the prophet Samuel, the end of the time of the judges, the death of Eli, the last judge, Samuel, the first real prophet to the nation. We've seen the anointing of the first king, that being King Saul. We saw his rise in popularity and success, and we saw what half-hearted faith does for us in his repeated struggles and failures, not only in battle, but morally as well. We've seen the life of faith, not only of Samuel, but also of Jonathan, Saul's son, and also King David. Tonight, we will see God intervene in David's life once again to keep him from a tragic mistake. We will see David in a very, very difficult point. And we will hear a psalm read that was written during this time, a time when he is not only in danger from the enemy, but in danger from his own men. And we will end the book tonight with the death of King Saul. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 29 in its entirety, all of its 11 verses. And this is from the English Standard Version. And it reads, "Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish, the commanders of the Philistines said, 'What are these Hebrews doing here?' And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, 'Is this not David, the servant of King Saul of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? And since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day.' But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said to him, 'Send the man back, that he may return to the place to which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to the battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the hands of the men here? Is this not David, of whom they sing to one another in their dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Achish called David and said to him, 'As the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me it seems right that you should march out and in with me in the campaign. For I have found nothing wrong with you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, the lords do not approve of you, so go back now, and go peaceably, that you do not displease the lords of the Philistines.' And David said to Achish, 'But what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?' And Achish answered David and said, I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders have said, he shall not go up with us to the battle. Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who came with you, and start early in the morning, and depart as soon as you have light. So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines went up to Jezreel. So earlier, we saw the Philistines were gathering. We've mentioned this a couple of times, that this is not history in a secular sense. There's a purpose that the writer has, and there are times when they will take things out of chronological order to suit the story. We see that tonight. For in the beginning of chapter 29, it says the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek. But if we go back to chapter 28, chapter 28, the Philistines had already left Aphek and were gathering at the place where Saul could see them. And that's what drove Saul to seek the Lord. Not getting an answer from the Lord, Saul then seeks the presence of Samuel through the medium in Endor. So we have that section where the Philistines went out, which caused Saul to seek advice from Samuel, who's already dead and gone. So he goes to this, we call her the Witch of Endor, but she's actually a medium. And now we see an account where the Philistines are headed that way. So some stuff chronologically is out of place a little bit. But that's just so that the story flows well here at the end. So the Philistines are gathering with their forces, and as the Israelites are encamped in the spring in Jezreel, the lords of the Philistines, it says, are passing by with their hundreds and with their thousands. So we see that the Philistines are well organized in their troops, right? They're marching to battle. They're not just a bunch of knuckleheads, meandering out there to the fight. These guys are well equipped militarily. They've had Iron Age weapons for 40 plus years at this point, and they certainly they come to win, right? David had taken refuge, we saw in chapter 27, he had taken refuge outside of the nation of Israel. He went to the land of the Philistines, the enemy of Israel, to escape Saul. It seems that he knew that Saul would not be able to get him there. He would give up searching for him because Saul would not be welcome with his troops no matter what he was claiming to do in Philistine land. So David found refuge there. As David is in the land with troops, they are going to battle. It's expected of him to join in the battle, and that's what he does. He goes out with them. The problem is, those that he is going to fight is his own country. The lords of the Philistines, as it says here, and in another place it'll call them commanders, those are the kings or the lords or the commanders of the 5 different cities that we've spoken about in the Philistine land. They look at this situation and said, this is not good. We have plenty of men. We would be much better off without David. Because how could he better win Saul's favor than by going out to battle with us and then turning on us and killing us? What they don't realize is there is nothing David can do to win Saul's favor. Right? Now, who knows what David would have done at this point? The language is ambiguous as we'll read through this, and you'll see that, and I'll explain it as we go through. as to what David's plans ultimately were. But if you just take it at face value, David is going out to fight his own people, and God will intervene. I believe God intervenes at this point through these Philistine commanders and keeps David from having to go into that battle and make a decision, him and his men, on how they're going to respond. So the Philistine commanders say, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" Now Achish has, he's had since the time where David acted like he was crazy and got away from him, since David has come back, Achish has a pretty high opinion of David. David has done well. David's gone out raiding certain places, telling Achish that he was raiding the Israelites. So Achish already believes that he's attacked his own people. And he's been giving Achish part of the spoil that he's won in his sojourns into these various different countries. So Achish likes David and feels that David will be an asset in this. And he presents that to the commanders of the Philistines. The commanders of the Philistines aren't having anything to do with it. They absolutely disagree. No, we're not putting up with this. Send him home. In fact, the way they say it, let's see here. Send the man back to the place which you have assigned him. So they're pointing out the fact that David's already won you over. You've already given him property, right? Send him back. We're not going to have him. Are we ready?
Yes.
Food?
We're ready.
Okay. All right. Shall we assign by tables?
Yes.
Why don't we start with the back? And just, you guys just get your stuff and enjoy, and I'm just going to continue to teach due to the interest of time. Does that work? All right. So we just kind of want to keep it down for the recording. That's the only issue. So they tell Achish that they're not having anything to do with David joining them in the battle. Achish tells this to David, and I don't know how many times we've seen this from David, but David says, "What have I done?" Right? Time and time again, that seems to be David's thing. The first time we heard him say that was when he was going up to find out about Goliath. He was asking about the reward that was going to be given to the man who killed him, and his brother's like, "Get out of here, you runt. Go back and take care of those sheep like you're supposed to." And David's like, "Well, what have I done? All I'm doing is asking a question," right? And then on a couple of occasions, he confronts King Saul for chasing him, and he says, "What have I done? What have I done?" It seems like David has questions constantly, and he's not getting the answers. At least he's not getting the answers that he's looking for. So the Philistine lords point out that, they were well aware of who David was and how tough he was in battle, and they decide to send him back. So Achish tells David, "So go back now and go peaceably. You need to do what I'm saying here, or it's not going to go well for you here." And he replies even further that, "Hey, as far as I'm concerned, you're like an angel of God to me." And another point, Achish tells David, "As the Lord lives, you have been honest to me, and it seems right that you should march out with me." That's verse 6. So we see here Achish invoking the name of Yahweh. The covenant, where it says the Lord, that's the covenant name of God. Now we're not sure whether Achish actually did that, or whether the writer just says, "I'm not putting in the name of the God that he quoted." Just not doing it, right? But nonetheless, that was the Hebrew text that was passed down to us. Achish is invoking the name of the Lord and says, "You have been honest." David's been anything but honest with him. So Achish is completely fooled by David's shenanigans. The end result is, in verse 11, "So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went up to Jezreel." So how many times have we read that? Right after Saul and David meet up, it says Saul goes home, David goes back. He seems to constantly be parting ways with the people that he wants to be with because of one thing or another. So I'll go ahead and read tonight so that you guys can enjoy your meals. I'll just go ahead and read this next section here. And that'll be chapter 30, verses 1 through 15. Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negev and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because of all the people were bitter in soul, each one for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Verse 7. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them? He answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and surely rescue. So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Besor. Verse 11. They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David. And he gave him bread, and he ate. And he gave him water to drink. And he gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, to whom do you belong? And from where are you from? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant of an Amalekite. My master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We had made a raid against the Negev of the Cherethites and against that which belongs to Judah, and we burned, and against the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said to him, will you take me down to this band? And he said, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band. Coffee break.
What verse are you on?
I just finished reading verse 15.
Who was saying that to David?
The amount.
The Amalekite king?
The Egyptian that they caught, who was with the Amalekites during the raid.
You lost that. Okay.
All right, so we're back now at chapter 30, verse 1, and we're going to walk through this first section. So David and his men, having left the Philistine troops, they go back home to Ziklag. It's a 3-day journey. It says the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negev and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and had taken captive the women and all who were in it, both great and small. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. So while David is gone and his men are gone to do this, their duty as mercenaries living in a foreign country, their homes are raided, kind of in a similar sense to what David had been doing to the south of the Philistines, right? We read the last couple of chapters how David had been going out and raiding these towns and putting people to death and taking the spoils. Well, the Amalekites did the same thing. But they didn't put the people to death. They were going to take them back and make slaves of them. So when David and his men come back, after having been gone for some days, I'm sure as they're coming up over the rise, they see smoke and they wonder what's going on. The closer they get, they realize that's their town still smoldering. And there's no one anywhere. So they, really, how would you find who did this? Possibly they had trackers and they were able to see footprints as to which way they led off, I guess. And they march out, the 600 men, and they come to the brook Besor. Now the brook, it's in a ravine, and apparently it was rather difficult to cross. And so 200 of the men just say, you know what, we're done. We can't make it any further. We'll stay here and guard the supplies and what we cannot carry through the brook, rather than just leaving it here unguarded. We'll stay here with it, and these other guys are going to go forward. And they say, great, we got 400 guys, that's enough, we'll go. And so they do. And as they cross over, they find this Egyptian. He's out there having been abandoned by his master. It shows how the class distinction was. You're a slave, we're far away from home. We're not going to have somebody carry you. You're not worth that. We're going to leave you here to die. Wow. So that's what they do. They leave him there to die. And there, you see, I've said this a couple of times. I quoted, I don't remember who it was that said this. Providence. Providence is the hand of God in the glove of circumstance. God turned that situation so that David is not in the battle while his family's being carried off. He's not fighting against his own people in the battle that will ultimately kill King Saul. How would that have gone over for David to be the next king? He was in the battle in which the king of Israel died, but on the wrong side. That wouldn't have worked. So he's turned around and sent home, and as he gets home, he has to take off and go get his family. Now, some Amalekite master, he has a sick servant, and he's like, we're not taking you with us. We're not going to carry you. You can't walk. They leave him. Providence of God. That's the guy who David and his men will revive. They will feed him and give him water until he's well enough that he can guide them to the Amalekites. And that they do. See? The hand of God in the glove of circumstance. I wish I had come up with that one. That was a really good line. So yeah, at verse 14 he says, it's the Egyptian speaking, says, we had made a raid against the Negeb of the Cherethites and against that which belongs to Judah and against the Negeb of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. Saying that, they know they've got the right guy. David says, will you take me down to this band? And he says, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down. Having been abandoned to die, this slave is no longer loyal to his master. Right? So that leaves us at verse 16. Making quicker progress than I thought tonight. I'm going to read, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. So during this time, if we backed up just a little bit, I kind of brushed through it. Verse 6 says, David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because of all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. We believe that David wrote Psalm 25 during this time. And Candace is going to read for us Psalm 25.
In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. No one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame, but shame will come on those who are treacherous without cause. Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me. For you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. Remember, Lord, your great mercy and love, for they are from of old. Do not remember the sin of my mouth and my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me. For you, Lord, are good. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he instructs sinners in his ways. He guides the humble in what is right and teaches them his way. All the ways of the Lord are loving and faithful toward those who keep the demands of his covenant. For the sake of your name, Lord, forgive my iniquities, though it is great. Who then are those who fear the Lord? He will instruct them in the ways they should choose. They will spend their days in prosperity, and their descendants will inherit the land. The Lord confides in those who fear him. He makes his covenant known to them. My eyes are ever on the Lord, for only he will release my feet from the snare. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. Relieve the troubles of my heart and free me from my anguish. Look on my afflictions and my distress, and take away all my sins. See how numerous are my enemies, and how fiercely they hate me. Guard my life and rescue me. Do not let me be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness protect me, because my hope, Lord, is in you. Deliver Israel, O God, from all their troubles.
Thank you. David, just the more I read of him, the more he amazes me.
That was one of David's songs?
Yeah. Believed to be written during this time where he comes home, his family's gone, the city is burned, and now his men are speaking of stoning him because of their anguish of heart. It says further in verse 6 that because all the people were bitter in soul. When these guys first started to gather around David, it used that same term, bitter in soul. All those who were bitter in soul, those who were in debt, those who were in difficulty, they started to gather around David. And now they're bitter with him because of the loss of their families. David is such a strong man of faith and such a strong leader that he walks through this. And we see that at the end of verse 6, in his great time of difficulty, it says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. And we read how he strengthens himself. Forgive me of my sin. I like when it says, for your name's sake. He's not saying, hey, forgive me because I deserve it, or because I'm a believer. Forgive me because of who you are. Right? That's where I really find hope. Because there are times when I feel like I've got a little sin, so I probably got, maybe a couple points with the Lord. So let me redeem some of those. And it doesn't work that way. But what about those times when we've had a great failure? If we're coming to the Lord on a, hey, let me redeem a couple of these tickets for some good things I've done. If that's our mindset, even though that doesn't work, but I think it's our nature to do that. But when we are in great sin, or something tragic has happened, and we had a hand in it, it helps to realize that God doesn't forgive us because of us. He forgives us because of who he is, because of his unfailing love. That is who he is. Is it Peter that says, or no, maybe it's John that says, God is love, in one of the New Testament epistles. Yeah. The term in the Old Testament is hesed, H-E-S-E-D, translated various ways. The term, the way I like it, translated, that attracts me is unfailing love. It never fails. Because I fail. Right? People around us fail. Those we look to for strength fail. Even Christian leaders fail. Those who may have had 40 or 50 years of a ministry of integrity, something happens and they fail. God's love never fails. And in our times of deepest trouble, we rely on him because of who he is. And that's what we learn from David in the Psalms. If you don't have a habit of reading through the Psalms, I would strongly encourage you to. And you don't need to read for an hour. Read one. And just go back and think about what he's saying. Just think about what the psalmist is saying. Maybe find a verse or two just to meditate on and see where God will minister to you in that. David found strength in the Lord his God. See, what did Saul do when his men opposed him? Remember, he was supposed to go and take out the Amalekites and kill their king? And yet he failed. And when Samuel confronted him, he said, well, my men were this way. And he gave in to him. David is a better leader. Not only is he a man of faith, he's a better leader. These guys just wanted to do bad. They weren't against Saul. They just wanted the spoil. And Saul gave in to him. These guys want to kill David. And look at David's response. Psalm 25, and then in verse 7 it says, David says to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. I need an answer from God. Hey, it's good to get good advice from the people around us, but there are times when we, you know what? Good advice is good advice, but I need a word from God. I don't need what you think God has for me. I need God to speak to me directly. And that's what David does. He calls for the high priest and he says, shall I pursue this band? And shall I overtake them? And the Lord answers, go get them. Get them, boy. Sick them. And he does. So that leaves us at verse 16. And when he had taken him down, behold, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight until evening of the next day. Not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether great or small, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back all. David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, this is David's spoil. Then David came to the 200 men. You know what, I'm just going to stop there, just real quick. So back to verse 16. So the Egyptian leads him down, and they see the Amalekite raiders spread out with all their spoil, right? And their guard is down. They're partying it up. They're eating and drinking and having a great time with all the spoil that they have. And the scripture says that David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day. Most likely, the nighttime portion of that was him scouting out every portion of it, and they attacked at first light. That's what history tells us the way the battles went. They wouldn't necessarily have attacked at night. They wouldn't be able to see who their own people were. But they would have watched it closely and attacked at first light. And Josephus says that as well, the first century historian. I read his commentary on this. He said they attacked in the morning at first light, and they fought them until the evening. And the only ones that were able to escape were 400 who jumped on camels and fled out of there.
Camels?
Camels. And the rest of them, gone. And now all the spoil, not just their own stuff from Ziklag, or the stuff that was captured from the land of Judah, but also was all the stuff that was taken from the Philistines. So now, once again, David has a vast amount of spoil. Nothing, I like this, verse 19. Nothing was missing. Neither small or great, sons or daughters, spoil, or anything that had been taken. David brought back all. And that is how the Lord restores. He doesn't restore half-heartedly. It doesn't necessarily come in one fell swoop the way it does here. My life's a testimony of that. I had lost everything to the enemy through my own doing, and the Lord restored. And I have much greater in every way, physically, monetarily, spiritually, emotionally, friends, better friends, a beautiful wife whom we have built the life together. God has restored, and there has been nothing lost from what the enemy took from me. But it doesn't necessarily happen like this, right, in one day. For those who have been hurt by the enemy and have had a life of addiction, we didn't lose it in a day. We didn't lose it in a year. So I know guys that are in recovery, they get, you know, hey, I've been doing this for a year, I've been doing this for a year and a half, and I still don't have a car, and I don't have these things. You didn't lose it in a minute either. Be patient. Wait upon God and be faithful. He restores these things. But I think when we see the nation of Israel coming out of Egypt and taking over the land, God says he was going to drive out the enemy before them. But he wasn't going to do it immediately. Because if he did it immediately, the land would be overrun by wild animals, and the Israelites wouldn't be able to take over. They couldn't handle it. The Israelites couldn't handle having all of that at once. So God did it step by step by step for them. They had to work for it, and it's the same way with our restoration. If he gave it all back to us on day one, I know it would have been with me. On day 3, it would have been gone again. I would have lost it all. But I have a much better appreciation for it after a little bit here, and he keeps me on a short leash. He doesn't give me enough leash that I go out and run out in traffic and get hit by a car. To use the analogy of taking your dog for a walk, right? Yeah, I've acted like a dog. And he keeps me on a short leash. Thank you for no comment there, young lady. All right, let's move on.
Such a good wife.
And look at the result of David's victory in verse 20. Those men who wanted to stone David, David captured all the flocks and herds and the people. The people are, quote, those men who wanted to kill David. The people drove the livestock before him and said, this is David's spoil. Now they want to honor David. Like 20 minutes ago, it was get a rock. Probably wasn't 20 minutes. It'd been a couple of days, right? But, you know, they were ready to kill him. They were hurting. David's the one that said, we need to do this thing. They went out and they followed him. They come back and there's disaster. But David didn't give up. He pressed into the Lord in faith. He didn't know what was going to happen. He strengthened himself in the Lord first. First it says he strengthened himself. Then he got a word from God. Not the other way around. He didn't find strength after the word from God. See, I think oftentimes the Lord doesn't, when we come to him with our issue, what he wants us to the place he wants us to be is, I'm good with whatever your answer is. I kind of want my way. God wants the answer of faith that says, I trust that you know better and you will do better than what I am asking for. So let me present this situation to you, whether it's a healing or a job or a relationship or whatever it is. But to trust God and say, yes or no, I want what you want. That is prayer changing something. It's not changing the circumstance. It's changing me. All right, verse 21. Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David, and who had been left at the brook Besor. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that which each man may lead away his wife and children, and depart. But David said, you shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who went down into the battle, so shall his share be who stays with the baggage. They shall share alike. And he made this a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. When David came to Ziklag, he sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. It was for those in Bethel, in Ramoth of the Negeb, in Jatir, in Aror, in Sifmoth, in Estemoa, in Rachel, in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, in the cities of the Kenites, and Hormah, and Bor Ashan, and Athak, and last we read in Hebron, were all the places David and his men had roamed. So David and his men, they're returning. The 400, they come upon the 200. Remember, these guys that are with David, these were the discontents, right? These were the guys that were in debt. These were guys that the law was after, just like David. And so these are not necessarily upstanding citizens. And they look at this and go, you're not getting this. We went out to battle. You got nothing coming, buddy. Oh yeah, you can take your wife and kids. I don't want them. But that new Cadillac that you had, we're taking that. And David's not putting up with that. He's like, no, the Lord gave us victory. Who are we to take from our brother when the Lord is the one who gave the victory? And notice in verse 21, it said, now, just as I read verse 21, listen to all the times it says David. Then David came to the 200 men who were too exhausted to follow David and who had left it at the brook Besor. Then it went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. So what is that, 4 times in one verse? So who's the subject of that verse? He was pointing out the focus now is on the victorious David, the one who put his strength in God. And he corrects these wicked men, and he says, verse 23, David said, you shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. he has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you? You guys are a bunch of knuckleheads. And then he makes this statute. For as his share is who goes down into the battle, so shall his share be who stays with the baggage. We're all in the same army. We will share. And then, look in verse 26. When David comes to Ziklag, what does he do with all this spoil? David is politically astute. Okay? All the places that David had been over the last 15 years, he sends spoil. David's got a lot of spoil. He has two options here. To be very wealthy, because the people said, this is David's spoil, right? Or to pay back those who had taken care of him and his men over the last 15 years. And he does. He goes city by city by city, and he sends spoil to them. He sends them goods, money, food, livestock. Thank you. Thank you. I haven't had an opportunity to be able to thank you in a solid way. Here's a solid. Here's something coming back to you now. And the city that we read of last is Hebron. Hebron is the city where David will reign for 7 years as king before he moves his capital to Jerusalem. David's wise what he does. All right. And to finish up, I'm going to read, we're now in chapter 31. And we read the tragic death of King Saul. So I'm just going to, it's only 13 verses. I'm going to go ahead and read through chapter 31. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel. And the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he greatly feared. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men, on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day, verse 8, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard that what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons off the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh, and they burned them there. And they took their bones, and they buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. So now to the battle. The Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. So the prophecy is coming true. Yeah, the temperature went back up.
No, I tried to turn it down and
I don't know, I
it
can't
never
figure
came
it out.
back on.
maybe just pop the door open if you would, sir.
All right.
Back to 80 degrees in here.
Yeah. Nucleus.
So the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. So just as Samuel had prophesied from the dead, Saul would lose all three of his, not all three, those are not his only sons, but he would lose his three sons who were there in the battle with him during the battle. I know I mentioned this before, but I find Saul to be courageous at this point. I think that, yes, he falls on his own sword. He was not going to live. He knew that. He had heard a word from God. You're dying tomorrow. He wasn't dead yet from those archers, and the Philistines are coming. What do you think they're going to do with Saul? You think they're going to kill him in one shot? I don't think so. They're going to extend his life just as long as they can and torture him until he's dead. And Saul knows that. He's not having it.
So when they hung his body on the wall, he didn't have his head, right?
Right. Yeah, they're nice guys.
Called him
What was
Art.
the purpose of that?
Excuse me?
What was the purpose of that?
To show their victory over Israel.
It's like a cat with like a mouse, right? Like showing like their.
Yeah.
They got their.
Yeah, they're showing, and they're going to take his armor. Well, let me read through this, and then we'll get into that. No, it's good. So the battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him. Yeah, they did. And he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me, or make sport of me," as some of the translations read. And that's exactly what they would have done. But the armor bearer, like David, he's not going to strike the Lord's anointed. He says, "No, I can't do that. You're going to have to find another way." Therefore, Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell upon his sword and died with him. So the armor bearer, if he were to go back alive, how do you think he would be treated? Where's your master? Oh, he died in battle. Oh, and you made it out okay? How'd that happen? That wouldn't go over well, right? Your master dies in battle. Unless you die in battle, there's a problem, right? You abandoned him, maybe you turned on him, who knows? But you didn't do your job, because your job is to help him. If he's dead, you should have been dead as well. And he realizes that, and he does the same thing. Thus, verse 6, thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, per Samuel's prophecy, and his armor bearer and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan, saw the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. Now, if we had maps, we would see that we are nowhere near Philistine territory. We are all the way to the Jordan River, between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. We're well into Israelite territory. And these guys flee and leave their cities. And now the Philistines are setting up cities right in the middle of the land of Israel.
Bob,
And
it
so
was literally about 50 miles
from
where their city was where the battle was.
Yeah, Israel's geographically, it's not a great big area.
Right.
Right, like California. It's not like as big as we are by any stretch. So the next day, verse 8, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And as was common, they cut off his head. That would be the common way that they would account for the number of dead. They would cut off the heads of all the soldiers and pile them up, and that's how many people were dead. That they know what their victory entailed. But of men who are officers or the king, they can see Saul has different clothing, right? They know who he is. Obviously, they don't know a picture of him. We didn't have pictures back then. But they know he's King Saul, and they cut off his head, but not to throw it into a pile. They're going to take that and they're going to parade it around. This is the king of Israel. And they're going to go through their towns and they're going to live it up. And they take Saul's armor, it says, into the temple of Ashtaroth. And so the concept there is that our God defeated your God, basically. Right? Remember how we read it, I think it was chapter 14, how they had captured the Ark of the Covenant, and they put it in their temple of Dagon? God's like, we're not playing this. That didn't last long. What was it, 7 months that it was out of their area, and the whole time the people were like, take it back, take it back.
But isn't there like other god, idols and things they worship? Like they didn't have their whole body, they couldn't go into their world and all that. They had like their own beliefs of
Oh yeah.
stuff like that,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. So then as their method of bragging, they fasten the bodies of Saul and his sons on the wall of Beth Shan. And the city of Beth Shan is at the entrance to the valley. And it's like at the, say the 405 and the 10, right? Or maybe the coming south, right? So it's at 2 major freeways. It's at 2 major thoroughfares, this city is. So everybody passing by would see it. They would see these bodies there. The purpose of that is to strike fear into anybody going by. That's the king. And if that was the king, go ahead. Go ahead and do something.
That
Right?
was it.
It's like the Romans. They would crucify people and leave them up. And they wouldn't crucify them over in a corner. They would crucify them along the thoroughfares. So everybody would see. And you go, yeah, I was thinking of stealing something, but I think I'm going to do something different. I'm going to get a job instead. You know, I don't like working, but that doesn't look comfortable, right? Strikes fear into them. And the last thing we read here is the honorable men of Jabesh Gilead. We may remember, we heard of these people before, when there was an opposing king who was going to besiege their town, and they said, hey, we're just going to give in to you and be your servants. And the other, I don't remember the name of the other nation, but the other nation's king said, oh, we'll let you do that, but first we're going to gouge out the right eye of all your men. And they go, hey, give us a week to think about it. And they sent messages out. And this was one of Saul's first victories. Is Saul sent word back to them and said, by noon tomorrow, you guys will be free men. Don't worry about it. And Saul and his army, he mustered an army, and they went and they defeated those people that were going to gouge out the right eye of all the men of Jabesh Gilead. So now the men of Jabesh Gilead honor King Saul and his sons, and it says they march all through the night, and they take down their bodies, and they bring them back to Jabesh Gilead. Now, it was not common for cremation. However, it doesn't tell us why they did. I think the reason they did was to keep the Philistines from coming and taking the bodies again and doing more to them. And for one thing, they'd already been dead a couple of days, so they're decomposing, right? You don't want to be dragging these bodies around too much. But by burning them, there's no chance now of the Philistines taking them and doing anything else disrespectful to the Lord's anointed. And they do. And they honor him. They honored King Saul and his sons, and they took the remains and they buried them under a tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. Now, when they fast for 7 days like this isn't a 24-hour fast. What they do is they fast until evening, right? They have nothing to eat or drink throughout the day, and then after 6 p.m. it's the next day, and they have something to eat, and then they wake up in the morning, they fast again. And if you're one that has a difficult time and you want to fast, and you have difficulty fasting for that all the way through the night like that, you might try that. Fast breakfast, fast lunch, and set a time limit, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and say this is the time in which I will eat. Because that way you're able to, rather than just completely abandoning it and not being able to participate in something as beneficial as fasting, try it that way, I would recommend. And with that, we come to the end of 1 Samuel.